Bernard-Henri Lévy hardly needs an introduction. An intellectual, a philosopher, a journalist, a writer, and a filmmaker, BHL, as he is better known in France, is undoubtedly one of the most prominent intellectuals of our era and one of the most influential philosophers of our time. He is a close friend of the Hebrew University, where he was honored with the prestigious honorary doctorate from the University of Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, and Martin Buber. In his acceptance speech in that ceremony on June 1, 2008, Bernard-Henri Lévy referred to our institution as a symbol of a miracle where Israel and the diaspora are reconciled through universal values. He also described Hebrew University as the place witnessing the resurrection of the Hebrew language. And indeed, 2 years ago, we celebrated the miracle of our centennial, our 100th birthday, as a university established a whole generation before the establishment of the State of Israel. BHL has written more than 30 books and has been advocating and raising awareness about every possible conflict in every corner of the globe in his pursuit of justice, in Bangladesh, in Libya, in Iraq, to name just a few. He's always been the voice of reason and integrity. Bernard-Henri Lévy has just published his book, The Virus in the Age of Madness, which to my mind is the first serious intellectual look into the pandemic engulfing us, making our dialogue today even more timely. And on a personal note, during my years in Paris, I had this unique privilege of making the pilgrimage to meet BHL every time I needed to consult with a smart person. And we would exchange ideas regularly on a variety of issues, from peace negotiations to global developments to anti-Semitism. I'm therefore extremely proud to introduce Bernard-Henri Lévy once again to the Hebrew University Board of Governors. Cher Bernard, je vous remercie infiniment au nom de l'Université hébraïque de Jérusalem pour votre amitié. C'est vraiment un grand plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. Good evening, Bernard. Welcome back. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, my dear Yossi. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The pleasure and the honor are for me. Your university is so prestigious, and to have been once or twice, one of the honorees of your university has been one of the prides of my life. So I'm happy to be back today.
I have a few questions on the pandemic. And let's start with the fact that the corona pandemic has changed life in a profound manner. Social habits, employment, relations in the family, governments, etc. What lasting impact is this going to have on us as a society once cure is found?
I hope that it is just a terrible crisis, but not a crisis. And I do hope that we will not keep in heritage some two new habits. Because, Yossi, at the end of the day, I liked a world where you could shake hands. I liked a world where you could hug. I liked a world where a secular Jew could do his duty, who was to go to the most remote people and to help and to secure. I loved a world where less secular Jews devoted to study, could study together in a real yeshiva and not by Zoom. This world of yesterday, was not so bad. So I really hope that the social consequences will not be too dramatic. It would be very bad.
Well, this world of yesterday is, to my mind, much better than the world of today. But you know, Bernard, governments have taken some significant emergency measures. Some of these necessary measures certainly reflect an infringement on basic human rights, such as closures, curfews, lockdowns, closure of academic and religious institutions. How concerned are you, as an intellectual, that once cure is found, all of these draconian measures will not be used to curtail in certain societies some basic human rights?
I am concerned. Honestly, I am concerned. Not because I suspect any devilish will or diabolical wish in those who govern us. I don't believe that. But I fear that in the societies themselves, liberty, freedom, rights, and so on, they are a joy and they are also a burden. We all know that freedom is a joy, an exultation, but also a burden. It's not so easy to be free. So my concern is that we could be numerous to think that at the end of the day, a life without the burden of freedom is not so bad. I hope that I'm concerned that a lot of our co-citizens might think that it is a good deal, or it might be a not too bad deal to exchange our freedom against 100% health security. And this would be a devilish deal. In France, I saw today that 75% of the population was comfortable with the curfew which was decided yesterday night. It's a lot. Maybe this curfew is useful. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But even if it is useful, even if it has to be observed and obeyed, it is a nightmare. It is another style of life. And I'm ready to respect it, but with the feeling, the deep feeling, that it can be only an exceptional state. I'm afraid to see many people believing that the exception can be the rule or can partly shape the new rule. This is my concern, that we might face a slow but steady change in our way of being together, in our civilization, in other words. This is a possibility and a bad one.
Well, you know, not only because I represent an academic institution, but to my private, humble opinion, the solution to this crisis will come from researchers and scientists, not necessarily from politicians and governments. And my question to you is, as a result, will society better appreciate science, better understand the importance of science? Et en plus, what is the role of the intellectual in this evaluation?
The democracies who respect better science, the societies who respect better science are of course democracies. The scientists are not at home at all in autocratic regime or totalitarian regime. Democracy is their home. Though you can have also in democracies some danger on science. I saw a few weeks ago in an editorial of the scientific magazine, American scientific magazine, Nature, an editorial saying two things: that scientists had to be online with the new anti-racist movement Black Lives Matter, which is fine. But the editorial said a second thing, that to be part of or to be sympathetic with Black Lives Matter could imply some consequences in the very practice, in the very exercise of the science itself. This is in the model of democracy of the world, one of the models, which is America. And it's very serious. It means that even in a democratic regime, we can have some reflexes like, Lysenko in the Stalinian regime. So no regime is completely immune against a distrust on science. Democracies are more comfortable, but we have to be very careful also. What can an intellectual do about that? Number one, to hunt and to chase and to all these sort of tendencies, which is the tendencies to oblige science to obey to ideological purposes. This is the death of science. Anti-racism is a great cause, but it cannot be the umbrella under which science scholars make their research. Number two, intellectuals have to call for respect of independent and free research. But number three, science is not, and I'm speaking here as an intellectual and as a Jew, science is not an idol. Science is not God. Scientists can sometimes be mistaken. You have in the field of science some quarrels, some fights, as in the field of philosophy. Truth in science is an aim, a target which has to be pursued, but it is not given as the word of God. It is the result of a work, of a research, of some back and forth, and so on. An intellectual could also remind this to some of those who could believe that science is a new religion. Science has to be respected, but it is not sacred, or it not even better, it is not saint.
Well, of course it is not sacred. The very nature of science is that the ability to ask questions. This is so well enshrined into our Jewish tradition. We don't accept anything for granted. We don't accept anything as if one cannot pose questions. But let me ask you this. Not a single country, I think, was spared of this plague, which means that this is a global crisis, covering our entire globe. Yet it comes at a time where international cooperation, globalization, or joint action are not at their peak, to say the least. Is it each one to his own, or is there hope for some joint global action facing a global threat?
It has to be. And honestly, you have two tendencies today. There is a tendency, of course, to break with globalization. This is, alas, the trend of the diplomacy of our American friends since a few years. Not only the last administration, the previous one also. Obama administration, as much as the Trump administration, had a tendency to not to deglobalize, but at least to distrust or to make some breaches in old alliances we had with Israel, with France, with Europe. So there is this process. On the other side, you have a very strong holding process of globalization. And what happens today in scientific research is one of the examples of that. If we go through this crisis, if we go through this pandemic better than the pandemic of 1958, the Asiatic crisis, better than, I hope so, the Spanish flu of 1918, or even more again, less dramatically than the old plagues of Middle Age, it will be because of the globalization of research. It will be because today you have some scientists of Los Angeles, of Jerusalem, of Paris, of Berlin, of Auckland in Australia, who exchange their researches, who exchange their anxieties and their findings, despite the borders, despite the sometimes the craziness or the egoism or the diplomatic coldness of the cold monster who are often the states. So you have the two processes. And vive les savants, long life to the researchers, because they keep alive this spirit of globalization.
Well, I fully agree. I think that in the academia, in the academic world, internationalization is really a key word. You can hardly find a paper being published not being signed by a scientist from Europe, from the United States, from Israel, from China. So globalization or internationalization is key to our world. But let me ask you one other question that is not confined necessarily only to Corona, and this is about social media. There has been much talk of late of the dangers of social media, its ability to disseminate fake news, to divide people, to aggregate too much power in the hands of a few, saying that it's wreaking havoc on our political systems. Yet it also has been said that it gives many more platforms for free speech, for connecting people from afar. As an intellectual, how do you think social media is affecting our civilization at this point in time?
My dear Yossi, my dear ambassador, personally, I do my best to try to have the best use possible of the social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm trying to post some real contents and so on. But to be honest, I am afraid of the development of the social media. I'm afraid because first you said it yourself, it gives the same weight, the same importance to a real news and a fake news. They don't have any criterion inside themselves to make the difference between the truth and the lie. The freedom for everyone to express his own opinion has turned into the freedom of everyone to have his opinion judged as equivalent to the opinion of the scientist or the scholar. This is a real concern. This idea of a freedom of speech, which turns out to be the equality between nuts and truth, this is the point. Another point, I'm afraid also, you know, in Instagram and so on, you have some friends, okay? Some followers or some friends. I'm sometimes afraid that the more friends you have on Facebook, the less you have in real life. That it is like a fake currency of friendship which is available in these social networks and which wipes out the real currency of true, deep, genuine friendship. So there are some real civilization concerns, and I'm not even speaking of what happens. We all have this experience. What happens with our memory? We all have this experience during a dinner between friends or between a lunch with our beloved. We are looking for a souvenir, and automatic gesture. We put the hand in our pocket and we Google. Google has become a sort of portable memory, a memory in the pocket. There is in the history of Christianity a story, a legend of Saint Denis. You know Paris, you know the hill of Saint Denis. He was a martyr of the first century of the Christianity, and the legend says that he was beheaded, and that after being beheaded, he took his head under his arm, and he climbed the hill with his head under the arm. We all are, with our, not our head, but our memory in our pocket, we all are sort of Saint Denis. This syndrome of Saint Denis, this externalization of our memory into a little machine, this is a new phenomenon which really dates from the social media. And if I were a scientist, if I were one of those brilliant, the best in the world, scientists of the brain of the Hebrew University, I will really fund or work on a study on that. What happens with the mechanisms of our memory with this new syndrome of Saint Denis, which is due to Google?
Well, I'll tell you, you mentioned luncheons and dinners. I'm even concerned when we were still allowed to have our children and grandchildren come for dinner. They all sit around the table and all the kids sit with their cellular phone, and how much of an interaction there is. But, one last question that I want to ask on something that I know is very close to your heart and very close to my heart, and this is on anti-Semitism. I remember very well my service in Paris, which started at around the time of the massacre of the Toulouse children, and ended up, unfortunately, at the time of the Jewish supermarché in Charlie Hebdo. And of course, it is not, anti-Semitism is not confined to France. Suffice it to mention the October 2018 in Pittsburgh synagogue, October 2019 in Halle, Germany. Are we, Bernard, are we doomed to live with anti-Semitism from now to eternity?
We might, yes. I think we might. I think that anti-Semitism is here. It is probably, it has a sort of structural, like a structural place in our civilizations. The question is it contained? Do we resist it or not? And do we give ourselves the means to resist it properly? Since World War II till maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we did. We had proper means, proper ideological weapons to resist it. There was also this Jewish pride, which was promoted a lot by the survivors of the war and by the children and their grandchildren, which contributed a lot to keep into respect the anti-Semites. Today, I'm not so sure that the front line still holds as well. I see, alas, an uprise, an increase, a progress, if I can say, of anti-Semitism, not only in France. It will be too simple, all over the world. And I must say, anti-Semitism being, as you know, the new anti-Semitism, being a complex mix of a few intellectual devices, anti-Zionism, denial of Holocaust, and competition of victims, let's say. For me, these are the three pillars of the new anti-Semitism. Alas, these three devices, who can make, if they join, like three threads, the atomic bomb of anti-Semitism, they are present everywhere, even in America. Our dear friends, Americans, they have some of the most powerful so-called institutes of denial of Holocaust, of negationism. They have a real tendency to have the victimhoods and the suffering memories to fight against each other. You have too many people today in the States who are saying you have to choose in your heart, in your own heart, if you bleed for the Jews or if you bleed for another minority. And this idea that we will have to choose between two victimhoods and two memories is one of the components of a possible anti-Semitism. And you have in America too a growing anti-Zionism. I know that it can seem odd to say it, but it was odd 20 years ago, not so odd since 10 years. So these three components being the DNA of the new anti-Semitism, alas, there is no democracy in the world, not to say no country, which can pretend to be free of them. So we have to be more careful than ever and more strong than ever. And I say strong because I do believe that against anti-Semitism, the reply is not crying, is not complaining. The reply is to act with moral, intellectual, and if we can, spiritual strength. Strength, I mean, the strength of the mind, and sometimes in extreme situation, the other strengths, as Israel knows well, but this moral strength is the real weapon that can weaken or keep in respect anti-Semitism.
Well, my dear Bernard, you'll be very happy to know that your university, the Hebrew University, which is opening the school year right now, is going through a record number of new students, which is an indication of the fantastic level of our university. And whenever conditions allow and the skies are open, we would love to see you again with us here at your beautiful university. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. I could not really think of a more better way to conclude this fantastic Board of Governors of the Hebrew University. And again, I wish you lots of good health and hope to see you soon in Jerusalem.
Thank you. Soon in Jerusalem. I would like to be able to shake hands, but we do, virtually.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Yossi.